Welcome, viewers. I have this distinct honor of calling Evan Kaplan a friend and a mentor. 4 years ago, when I was contemplating starting Sanchmo, he's the first person I've reached out to get advice, and he's been part of my journey ever since. So today, I'm delighted that Evan, thank you so much for coming to this podcast. It's great that you made some time. I know you have such a busy schedule. Thanks for coming.
Sanjay, obviously it's my pleasure. And calling me a mentor, that's awesome. I'll take it. Take it. I think you could do better, but I will take it.
No, I mean, you were I was calling you and
Yep.
saying, am I making the right move? And you said, just go for it. And I just went into an abyss. I had no idea. So, and I think that's the best thing I did. Uh,
And I should comment, I think you've done a beautiful job building a
thank you.
business, being sort of the axe on a lot of these data products and helping people understand it. You've been a tremendous resource to the community, independent of commercial success.
Thank you
So,
so much. So, Evan, so much I want to talk to you about. But let's start with your introduction. And the reason I'm saying so much is because although when you introduce yourself, you talk about the company that you're running, but I want to cover the vast space of data and AI if you're okay with that.
yeah, it'd be great. I love
Okay.
having I love having these conversations with you.
Yes. All right. Let's start with your introduction.
So, a little bit about my background.
Yep.
Well, where do I start? I'm a native New Yorker. I built most of my career in Seattle. I started my first company in '96, a company called Aventail. We built the first SSL VPNs.
Hmm.
We did that through the bubble. We built a great business. We then lost a bunch, and then we built it again, and we were able to transact and sell that company, which eventually became part of Dell. I took some time off with my family, and then I moved down to the Bay Area in 2009 to run a public company called iPass, which at the time did global dial-up and Wi-Fi, and it was an interesting journey running a what was a small cap public company through a very difficult period of time. I learned a lot and enjoyed it, and actually raised my kids here in the Bay Area. It was exciting. And then about 9 years ago, I joined Influx. And that was, I joined Influx because I had a lot of conviction about open source. I did
Hmm.
not at the time, was not a database person. My
Hmm.
background had been security and networking throughout my career, and I'm a product person by orientation. But I joined Influx because I developed a lot of conviction about open source. When I was running the company, we built a pretty significant infrastructure around Cloudera. We had a number of Mongo replacements of Oracle. And so I just felt like open source was the future of infrastructure.
Hmm.
And so we're talking, this is like 2016, 2017. And I met Paul Dix, the founder, when I was working at Trinity Ventures. And we connected around a lot of topics, but I decided to join. At the time, there were 3,000 open source instances of InfluxDB, and I knew a little bit about time series, but not a lot. And today we're at 1.5 million instances that run daily of the open source, and it's been a long journey.
Amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
Evan, thank you so much. So 9 years you've been at Influx Data. That's how I got to know you. What is Influx Data?
So we build a time series database, an open source time series database. And by open source, I mean open source, MIT, Apache license,
Hmm.
fully permitted. And then we add software on top of that to commercialize. But it's a time series database, which means it's really highly specialized for metrics and events.
Hmm.
And so really high specialized to work in real time to collect time-oriented data for things like time series forecasting what's going to happen, anomaly detection, edge data replication, a variety of real-time use cases and a variety of analytical use cases, but very specifically when you know the data is going to be indexed around time.
Hmm.
And that's particularly relevant in the physical world, right? In which you're instrumenting physical systems planes, transportation, energy, in which you want to describe what's really happening and what's going to happen. It's a powerful tool.
I see. And so the use cases are, so you said some of the metrics and events, but also like financial trading, stock trading,
Yeah.
what are,
So the way to think about it is you're instrumenting systems to learn about them
hmm,
at scale so that you can predict and plan everything from, from how a system's going to behave to capacity planning to all that sort of stuff. And you break that into two broad areas. One is virtual systems. So financial systems, observability, all of that's virtual. You're instrumenting software, right, to see how the software is behaving. But then there's physical systems,
hmm,
whether, it's the electrical grid, whether it's space flights, whether it's satellites, whether it's transportation. Things are moving, whether it's industrial systems, things that are moving in the real world. So one has physical sensors and one has virtual sensors. But the output is time-based, time-based readings. And so if you think about sensors as a term, basically the lingua franca of sensors is time series data.
yeah,
Anything a sensor puts out, pressure, volume, temperature,
yeah.
humidity, whatever, that's going to be a piece of time series data. So you build a platform, not just us, but others in the category, build a platform to handle that at speed and pace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So when you started at Influx Data, I think the world was pretty monolithic, if I may. I mean, it was like well established, real clear boundaries between different database categories and the use cases. And now AI has come and disrupted, I think, quite a bit. The market's shifting. So, what are you witnessing? What has been the impact of of AI on your offerings and how the market has shifted?
So I would say, if you were to think about us, we felt like our big opportunity
Hmm.
for a long time, if I was to describe it, and you and I go back quite a ways from your time at Gartner, we would have described it as IoT centric,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's a
The,
good way to put it.
the
Yeah.
Internet of Things.
Correct.
And so
Yep.
we're collecting sensor data,
Yep.
we're connecting, and even though it wasn't all described as a big part of our business is network telemetry or financial trading, it's just IoT captured. And it was certainly the reason I joined.
Hmm.
My background was in networking, and I could see the amount of connectivity. It was not was changing dramatically, and this was relatively early days of 5G networks, and so that's why I joined, is I felt like the IoT thing. And so if we flash forward this period of time, yes, IoT represents most of our business, but what IoT is changing
Hmm.
dramatically.
I see.
And so if you think about, let me think about this. Sort of the canonical example and is if you take a self-driving vehicle, right?
Yeah.
What is that? What is that process that gets you to a self-driving vehicle?
Hmm.
And probably people wouldn't have described it because we weren't talking about the AI revolution when we started that journey, which is now probably 12, 15 years old. But you're reading a lot of sensors from the car at very, very fast periods, right? And you're running a learning loop on that feedback. So
Hmm.
you instrument the car, you put it in a situation, you watch what it does, you then correct based on that data, high resolution, generally high resolution time series data, what happened. You make a correction, you then instrument it again, you make a correction, you then instrument it again, you make a correction, you make it again. And you do this, I don't know, 7, 8 billion times, right? You get a self-driving
Yeah.
car that can handle
Correct.
virtually, can drive the streets of San Francisco and do all of that. Some of our
Yeah.
early customers were those kinds of people. And so nobody said that's AI, but of course, that's fundamentally what AI is. It's a learning model. And so all of these learning models start with the collection and processing of this high resolution data. And by high resolution data, I mean, millisecond or
Yeah.
sub. Like how is the system really behaving? right? And what period do I need to capture that system? At a gross level, most of the observability vendors capture at 5-second intervals. That doesn't work in the physical world,
Hmm.
right? You want a higher value intervals. So when I think about, so coming back to your question, when I think about physical AI,
Yeah.
think about time series as being a fundamental component. Because the first thing I want to do in a robotics or in transportation or satellite operating in space is I want a continuous feed of high volume, high resolution data that describe multiple vectors of
Hmm.
them. I want to process that. I want to build models around that. I want to forecast. I want to look for anomaly
Yeah.
detection. I want to build that all into the model, and then I want to act. So if I see the car, the vehicle, the system doing something that's slightly out of whack at a 10 millisecond interval, I can be like, okay, I can correct for that. I can see that. I can act for it. And so where we play in that world is we're super good at the collection,
Yeah.
super good at the high volume collection, and then we're super good at acting on the data, which is basically a query response time. So some of our queries, our last value queries, are sub 5 milliseconds, sub 10 milliseconds.
I see.
Right? And so that's the kind of thing that's happening in the real world that we're just beginning, that AI is just beginning to open up.
Got
And
it.
where I will tell you, most of our customers are not doing this,
Hmm.
but early customers, this is exactly what they're doing.
So basically, in a time series database, you need to have this ability to ingest this real-time data, events, metrics, logs in milliseconds, and then process them, query them in milliseconds, or train models. So that's it's you can do like a longer batch. I mean, you can do it, but the main focus is this very high processing, highly changing data at the lowest latency possible.
Yeah, I mean that's the core of it. The metaphor that I used often when I'm talking to, to our team and to, and some other vehicles is if you think about if AI is the brain, if the model is the brain, right?
Yeah.
Then the role that we want to play increasingly is we want to be the sensors. The sensors. We want to be the eyes, the ears, the touch, the
Hmm.
smell, the feel. We want to collect all of that data. We want to feed it into a model that can operate it quickly. And then we want to be the arms, the legs, the hands to act on the world. And the action is a query,
Yeah.
right? You see the system observes something, it sees something, it makes a query to the model, asks what to do, and it does it. That's where time series becomes
Yeah.
embedded and essentially into it. And so it comes back to you. I read your comprehensive paper on databases. I thought you covered it actually quite well.
Thank
Uh,
you. So,
uh,
Evan, without getting into any NDA material, I'm curious, are you working? We see Waymos all over San Francisco, and a company like OpenAI, Anthropic. So, are these companies actively, heavily into time series?
so what I can say, right, back I can't get into the NDA, is there are some of the model builders who are using us to instrument their LLMs.
I see.
But and then we can see, we don't see perfectly that there's a lot of the open source users who use our open source to do this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
LLMs are in the digital world, their model is a little bit different. What we're seeing in our, in our generation three open source is more the robotics companies and that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And
Which,
then
yeah. Which is amazing because I think robotics is the next massive horizon, next massive market. Uh, so that's a great place to be.
it is a great place to be. It'd be interesting to see how quickly it develops.
Yeah.
Paul, Paul, who's the founder of the company and my partner in this, we have a bet of what's the time frame that we'll have a affordable robot in our house doing house cleaning and things like that.
Yep. Apple's coming out. Apple's
He's
already
saying
announced.
he thinks it's I can't remember exactly what the bet is, but I think he thinks it's like 6 years, and I think it's like 12.
Oh, I think it's four.
Okay.
Well, we'll see. I think yeah. I was in China for a conference 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
There were robots. The keynote, or actually not the keynote. The MC of the conference was a humanoid robot.
And what was that like? Because I've seen these robots around at conferences, the dogs and these
Yeah,
other things, but
pathetic.
they don't seem
I, pathetic.
sophisticated.
Wasn't a, like actually, so this is the funny thought I had. The robots walk at a glacial speed. And I was like, you guys are so limited in your mechanical movement and amazing brain power because of LLMs. But, physically they're limited. But then, I had a very morbid thought that crossed my mind, which was like, well, I'm running around, jumping on the stage, doing the keynote, but I'll get old and I'll get as slow as these robots, but they will continue to improve. In 20 years they'll be as agile as human beings maybe. So
I
it's
don't think
early
there's
days.
any reason why they wouldn't be. You and I have lived, we're both old enough to have lived through a number of revolutions. Some were way faster than we thought, and
Yeah,
some were way slower than we thought. And so
correct. Yeah.
I face all of this stuff with a fair amount of humility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So AI, I'm literally blown away with some of the aspects of AI. For example, just last week Sam Altman overhyped and released GPT 5.0. And that was a very messy rollout. There's been a lot of criticism. But the funny thing is, the model itself is actually really good. And it's a lot cheaper than other models. But then he deprecated some of the older like GPT-4 or for example, because the idea was just like a new software version comes out, actually not Influx 2 to Influx 3. I think that's a major shift. But
Yeah.
like if a new version comes out of an iOS, we don't use the old version, we just use the new version. But AI is different because AI has an emotional attachment. AI is like, I have a dog who's old and not performing well, and somebody without telling me says, well, I got you the same breed but a better dog, which is far more capable. But that attachment, so it's not like a software. AI is, people are literally connecting with AI in far different ways than Sam Altman ever imagined. And so he had to backtrack and bring back Foro.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I like this version of ChatGPT.
Hmm.
I'm sure I don't exercise it in the way that a lot of the
Yeah,
analysts are
same.
exercising.
Yeah,
So, but the simple notion that
yeah,
it asked me would I want the short query or the long one, and do
yeah.
it, all that sort of stuff. But the other day, a friend prompted me and said, why don't you ask ChatGPT what it knows about you?
Hmm.
And so I asked, literally, what do you know about me? And you know, well, so I've had a subscription for probably north of 2 years now, and it spit out like it knows very personal, a
Yeah,
lot of stuff about me. And so the switching cost over time becomes significant.
yeah,
And so your notion of the dog, I think, is an interesting analogy. Is that, if I have a dog, I'm less likely to switch. Now I play around. Obviously, we have Gemini subscriptions too. And so I play around with Gemini and we use Anthropic pretty deeply here, the Claude Code. Um, but um, but the context starts being really, really important over time.
that's
Really
great.
important. So
By the way, so Evan, this is why I like talking to you, because this is all unscripted. We're literally just talking about like having a fireside chat. So I asked ChatGPT to describe me. I was blown away. It
you
came
asked
back,
it to describe you?
yeah, describe
Oh,
me.
that's interesting.
It
Yeah,
came back and it said, you are a master storyteller. And I was like, wow, I never thought of it. I mean, I thought of it, I'm an analyst, I'm an engineer, and I research, and I do all these things. But master storyteller is like what it picked from the podcast and the blogs and the work I do, and uh, then I thought, no, let me be a bit, ask ChatGPT to be a bit harsher. So I asked ChatGPT to roast me. And
really.
what it came back was even funnier. it said you make fun of Gartner's hype cycle, magic quadrant, but then you rely on it and take advantage of it for your benefit. So,
That's I wouldn't. I'm going to ask. I'm going to actually do that. I wanted to roast me.
yeah.
That actually is a funny thing, but that's this kind of stuff is super interesting, but it's relatively what's the right term? The the digital world is relatively interesting, and the way LMs handle this sort of stuff. In my, I personally, I would say now of almost every one of my searches starts with ChatGPT. I would say it's
Hmm.
95 now
Oh,
out of
wow.
100, which is a really significant transition.
Right.
Even stuff that would work in Google just fine, I go to ChatGPT. But I think what's the right? It's fascinating.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just fascinating, but I'm really interested in how this starts, and maybe because of the background here, is how it starts incorporating into the physical systems and
Yeah.
how the data stuff. Like my conjecture is that, in a couple of years, 50% of the hits or queries to our database won't be human driven, won't
Yeah.
be human written,
Yes.
be written on the fly by an agent. And so
See, this is
what does
such an
that mean?
important point. Yeah, and I want to ask you, how does that affect the software that you're building? Because my point of view is that all the way up to this point, we have built all our user interfaces for human interaction, search boxes, PowerPoint decks, dashboards, reports, user experience, UI. But if more than 50%, some say even 80% will be consumed by AI, then what becomes the user interface for InfluxDB, for example?
Well, I mean, it's already changing, right? With the MCP servers in place,
MCP, yep.
how you query the data, native LLMs, text to SQL, where you just ask the query, natural
Yeah,
language. Like that's already happening.
yeah,
Now
correct.
the question is, what do the agentic stuff do in which, where you're interacting, it's interacting behind the scenes, driven by another system. You're spinning up instances of the data store, and potentially more ephemeral instances. You have specific data, you can divide the number of databases. My simple answer is, like a lot of AI, um, I can point at the future, but I don't really know what it looks like with any kind of resolution.
Got it.
I know that we'll see more of this, MCP driven sort of stuff and the other
Hmm.
protocols. I know that it'll be less human. I know that automation is such a big part of what we do that that'll be more system driven and agentic.
Yeah,
And so a lot of our stuff is at the core. A lot of stuff we think about is at the core databases. How do we make it faster? How do we make it more reliable for latest measurements? How do we increase the ingest loads? How do we just make the database
yeah,
itself? Because I think of all the systems that get disrupted by this,
yeah.
SaaS systems, workflow systems, I think databases are kind of elemental.
So on that note, I want to ask you, what do you think of Databricks bought Neon, and Neon claims 80% of databases are created by agents, they're ephemeral. That is not the idea of a database that I grew up with. It was a persistent store. It wasn't supposed to be something you bring up and shut down. But just this week, Databricks raised Series K at $100 billion valuation. You are close to Ali. Ali's on your board, correct?
He's on an advisory board.
Advisory board. Okay.
Um,
What do you think of Databricks? So they're saying they're raising money because of agents and they want to build out Lakebase, which is this ephemeral neon database, Postgres. You are in the same space, but for a different use case. But I'm sure there's some overlap. So just your thoughts on what's going on with Databricks raising money and the changing landscape of how databases are brought up and down and agents.
it's hard to talk about Databricks without talking about Snowflake, and then it's hard to talk about Snowflake without talking about Fabric, BigQuery, and
Yep.
and
Thank
Redshift.
you.
So
Yes. Yeah.
So we're talking about a class of data stores. Data
Yeah.
can be much more than that. And so the simple way to understand it, may not be perfectly correct, but it's certainly the metaphor that works for me is, when I was growing up in technology, there were really two databases. Maybe you could argue three or four, but really two. It was IBM DB2 and Oracle, and everything was relational, right? And
Mhm.
so, and your paper actually captures that quite well. I would say that those were the canonical databases of the time. And so if you're building an app, you had a reason not to start with those.
Correct.
I think what's happening is the canonical data platforms of this generation are Databricks and Snowflake. To different, obviously they have different strengths and different approaches. So depending on what you have, and then by proxy, the hyperscalers versions, Redshift, Fabric, and BigQuery. I think those are the databases of the future, the canonical stores. And so and your paper kind of touches on this, we as these specialty databases.
Hmm.
So let's say, you know, Influx in time series, Neo4j, arguably a Splunk, Elastic in search. I'm not sure where vector fits. It kind of,
So
you know,
vector kind of, yeah, it's neither transactional nor
yeah.
analytical. It's not, it's in relational, it's in non-relational. So
I think
vectors,
it's a feature of other
it's a
databases
feature. Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah.
And then, and document databases and things like that. So where do we all live in a world in which these are the canonical data stores? Um, and our view is you have to do a thing,
Hmm.
and a really important thing, really, really well to live in that world. And so, Ali acquired Neon, which I thought was brilliant. So now you can do Postgres relational kinds of stuff. And then I think Snowflake then followed, and if I'm right, it was
Yes.
Crunchy,
Crunchy data. Yep.
right? And so they're saying is like your normal Postgres stuff, just run it in ours, just run it in here. And so what happens is these lake houses become the store for enterprise data, structured data, unstructured data, highly specific data like ours, because that's where you build the models.
Hmm.
That's where you bring the data together. That's where you've done the ETLs, the ELTs, all that sort of stuff. And I think it's hard on companies whose primary business was ETL or ELT.
Yeah.
Primary business was that sort of stuff because I had more and more falls into the lake house. It reminds me early in my career when everything seemed to fall into the Microsoft OS. Like things, capabilities are going to fall into, and Postgres, I think, is just the beginning of that. The models are falling in, they're all hosting the model. And in some sense, these databases, these platforms, these lakehouses are critical. And so
Hmm.
you should take what I say with a grain of salt because we built Influx version 3 specifically with that idea in mind, that these were going to be the dominant data stores, that people were going to, potentially store their time series data in Influx, but they were going to query it out of something like Iceberg or potentially use Iceberg or open tables to upload to these databases because that's where the models were going to be built. You're going to take the time series models, you're going to take some of the unstructured data, potentially some of the other, you're going to put that together and you're going to build your sophisticated enterprise models or system models. And so I think that's the world that
Hmm.
we're going to live in over the next 15 or 20 years. And I think raising money, for Snowflake or Databricks, the other folks, just, their investment cycle has to be aggressive. And
So,
so, yeah. So
so Evan, correct me if I make a mistake here. My understanding is, and I haven't looked at this lately, Influx 3 was completely rewritten from scratch in Rust. And the storage layer moved from an LSM to object store, which means any Iceberg compatible engine can do analytics on it as InfluxDB is doing operational. Is that?
even that's a great high level, but it's even more
I see.
specific than that. So compute and memory were tied together in Influx
Yeah.
1 and 2. So as you scaled, if you had big memory stores, high retention of data, which you
Yeah.
do in the model world, it could get quite expensive. So we moved to an object store model, right?
Mm,
Built it around Apache Parquet because that's the
mm,
native of all of these lake houses.
Yeah.
And above Parquet, we didn't know, we knew about Delta Share at the time, but we didn't know Iceberg really well. And Iceberg started to come on. So then we built on a complete open source stack. And so the idea was
Hmm.
Parquet, Apache Parquet is an open source. S3 compatibility might as well be open source. And then you have open tables where you have Iceberg, and there's Delta Share also.
Yeah.
Those things are coming together. And then above that, we did something really interesting is we invested very aggressively in an open source project called Data Fusion. And now we're one of the key PMCs on that. Data Fusion is the idea is to commoditize the actual query planner query engine. And it's fantastic. It's got I don't know how many GitHub stars now, but it's a super popular product. Apple is a big committer to it. There are lots of startups who are using it. There's some cool technology for a company called Lake Sail. There's just really interesting, vibrant ecosystem around this,
Hmm.
but it's Apache. And so we built everything on this. And then above that, we did Apache Flight,
Hmm.
right, which is an
Arrow.
RPG, and then Flight SQL, which made it SQL ANSI compatible. So the other thing we did for this version of the database is we did SQL compatibility.
Yeah.
And I want to talk so because you know me, I want to eat some humble pie here. We I don't really want to, but I should, which is, 6 years ago, we started building our own functional language for time series called Flux. We open sourced
Yes. I
it.
remember Flux.
The
Yeah.
people who used it really liked it a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
but didn't see widespread adoption. And at the time, I think we were pretty dismissive of SQL, saying, the best language for querying, for querying this kind of data. And SQL's not the best, but it's pretty useful and it's pretty
Yeah.
available. So can't be 40 years old. And that was the headline of one of Paul's blog posts.
Hmm.
And here we are. The last 3 years we've invested, on complete SQL compatibility and all SQL stuff, and we now live in the SQL ecosystem in a big way, and so we have to eat a little bit of crow about things. SQL is is the basic language for all of this stuff now.
That is great. Yeah. So I want to go back to the market landscape. So you mentioned Snowflake and Databricks as two primary data stores. What is happening with the hyperscalers? In fact, even for Influx data, because between AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, they are building so much capability in their platform. AWS launched SageMaker Lakehouse with stuff that so many other specialized vendors were doing. And they have time stream for time series. And I know there's some partnership. Maybe you can educate us on that. Google has BigQuery and the entire ecosystem. And then Microsoft has Fabric. So what are you seeing in Silicon Valley, for example, these small companies, how are they going to survive? And then specifically for Influx data, how are you working with these big hyperscalers?
Yeah, it's a great question. How these companies survive, whether it's us, whether it's Neo4j, whether it's any of these specialty databases, is
Hmm,
really good at the thing that you need to do really well. And
hmm,
for us, that thing is becoming more important, which is time series. That's great, but we want to be continually better and better and better at that function and that capability because the requirements will continue to grow. And
yeah.
it's very difficult for a lake house, any of them, to be really good at real time. Just the
Hmm,
construction of it, the whole thing, that whole dynamic.
right.
It's just very hard for them to be. And why not partner with us if the data ends up in them anyway, right?
Right,
So you
right,
think of us as some sort of broad edge thing, and you think of them as the store, the master store to
right.
work on the data. But in terms of for us, we want compatibility with all of them, but we have a unique relationship with Amazon.
Hmm,
So Amazon, and this is unique for them too, they have licensed Influx, the open source, and they host it. It's called TimeStream for InfluxDB. They have announced that they're not taking any users for TimeStream, new
hmm,
users. They're asking people to sign up for time stream for InfluxDB. They will have a version 3 out
Oh,
this
wow. I
year
see.
of Influx. And we just have a really great partnership with them. And it's distinct because the background is there was a lot of complaints a few years ago that Amazon takes the open source, they don't pay the vendor, all that sort of stuff. And so they pioneered this very unique relationship with us. And so we think they're really important. But obviously, lots of our customers have Snowflake and Databricks. And so compatibility with those, as much zero ETL as we can get, integrating Influx with those are really important to us too. But Amazon is the one we have the closest relationship, and they're basically you can buy Influx on Amazon, not through Marketplace, directly through Amazon.
Right. So, one interesting thought that crossed my mind was because you said one thing, so you do, if you're a specialized vendor, you do one thing really well, and that's your moat, kind of, against other providers. And for InfluxDB, it's real time. But then, you got the whole real-time analytics, real-time
Analytics.
streaming companies that use Kafka, with Flink for analytics. Like you got Startree, Pinot, Druid, even ClickHouse. So do you run into these companies? But because they're more like ClickHouse is general purpose data warehouse. Uh, but then do you run into them or for overlap with them?
We run into ClickHouse more than any of the other.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see.
We rarely run into Druid. We really run
Hmm.
into Pinot. We rarely run into those sorts of things. Um, the Kafka, the streaming, and so um, this again, where ClickHouse is a more of a generalized
Yeah.
analytical database. It's, the time series stuff is quite different. So, we do a lot of schema on write, so you can be
Hmm.
much more flexible. Our ingest levels are pretty significantly different for the time series stuff. So whenever it's an IoT application, we kind of have it.
Yeah.
I don't want to say alone, but we're certainly the largest player in that sort of space. And
Got
so
it.
anything that's increasingly, and the more you get, I think the more you get into the agentic world, the more specialty pays off, ironically,
Oh, wow.
right?
Okay.
Because the more, whether it's a search database, whether it's a graph database or
Hmm.
whatever, the better you are at that specialty, the easier you are to call for the action, the better you are for the data store, the ability for the agent to integrate across multiple databases. At least that's our view. And so
That's
I
great.
would say, things like ClickHouse particularly are a little bit more broad-based. And it's hard for me to judge. I know Aaron quite well, but they seem very interested in the broader observability world.
Hmm.
Um, and even the Lakehouse world. So their aspirations are we're going to be great at time series. We're going to be
That is
really,
great.
really good at this thing
Right.
with a fundamental belief that time series is becoming incredibly more important.
Yeah. Reason I'm asking these questions is because I see there was another time series database which based on Postgres timescale, and timescale just changed the name to Tiger Data because they want to be known for the broader, wider Postgres ecosystem rather than just time series.
I mean, for them, it makes sense. Postgres is super relevant, and they're
Yeah.
really a Postgres company. I think
Right.
view is we built this thing, particularly in this version 3, right from scratch,
Yeah.
for
Correct.
built specifically for this kind of workload, because we think this
Right.
kind of workload's going to continue to grow and be
Right.
relevant. It's a fundamental strategic choice.
Right.
We didn't build on another database. We built the database.
Right. Yeah. That's a great distinction. As we get closer to the end of this podcast, I would love to hear how has your journey been building influx data over time. I'm also wondering how is it being impacted because we the go to market would rely on demand gen through SEOs. Now SEO itself is getting disrupted. You yourself said 95% of what you do is in AI now instead of Google. So how would somebody find influx data? So, what has your journey been like, and how is it changing? What's keeping you up at night?
That's a great question. And by the way, you could ask that right now of any CEO in any
Yes.
category of
Yep.
technology.
Yes.
And so obviously we're moving from a search-oriented model for discovery to a generative AI or geo model for discovery. And
Hmm.
so everybody, I have a team of 10 CEOs I meet with every quarter.
Hmm.
Every one of us is dealing like, what does it mean? How do we do
Yeah.
it? And we're all learning, and different people have developed different tricks. There are different tools, there are different services. And so we're very much in the middle of that journey, and it's pretty elemental for us. But at the
Right.
core for us, we're still an open source company.
Yeah.
And so developer word of mouth, when do you start your project with Influx? We have to, basically we're trying to do everything we can to educate people as when do you, maybe not even Influx, when do you start with a time series platform to solve, to address, to build the system that you want? And that has to be developer word of mouth. It's classic content marketing, but how you deliver the content changes, right? And the ways that you create the content changes. And then where you put them. So you're not looking to be the first blue link and to compete in the auction in the same way. You're
Hmm.
looking to have a body of work, a corpus of information that's available. This is why, you and I talked before we got on this about your paper. That's why I think your paper is so valuable. It's a significant corpus of information that I think in any kind of engine, it would be a tremendous resource. And so you're pushed on content marketing in ways that you weren't. Kind of marketing, obviously, every critical for a PLG company like ours, an open source company, but
Yeah.
now it's even more important. The more depth, the more capability, the more that sort of stuff. I think, but we're still early in that journey. So we bought some different tools, playing with different stuff.
Yeah.
But I would just say we're still in learning mode.
Is PLG now the preferred way? For open source, it has been, but what about for large companies? Because the markets are like the buyers are taking longer time to decide whether to buy or not, which means your revenue stream is slowed down. So, are you seeing a revival of PLG?
So PLG means different things to different people. So what I don't think it's pure PLG in that they just buy and transact without ever talking to a person,
Hmm.
without ever engaging in the next level of stuff. Particularly in the database world, I just don't think
Hmm.
in most cases, maybe in Neon for Postgres in which you're spinning that stuff. But most people are trying to build systems and work has to be characterized and databases and schemas have to be figured out and optimizations want to be figured out. And so you want a relationship. But um, with the open source world, you want people starting with the product. It's I've often said like our investors often want to introduce me to a CIO or something like that, and what do I say to a CIO? Do you need a new time series database for your thing? That's not a really useful conversation.
Hmm.
So the useful conversation, and this is really true now on
Hmm.
steroids, is does a developer use your tool? How have they used it in some sort of workflow, whether it's agentic? Has it been pulled in by one of the models to say, okay, you need a database that does this kind of thing, that kind of stuff? Can you link to, all the integrations happen at the developer, the builder level. That's what's really interesting. That continues to be interesting, but it's even more interesting in a world in which much of code is being helped or aided by people who are choreographing coding agents.
Right.
And so all of those integrations start being way more important than they would have been a year ago.
Very interesting. So, in your journey of building influx data, what are some mistakes that you've made and you've learned from them? What is something you're proud of? And again, this is for the viewers to
I'm
learn.
good at this. I'm good at the mistakes. Um, we made a few critical things that I wish we would have taken back. So the Flux investment that we talked about,
Yeah.
I think it would have been handy if we went right to SQL and embraced that
Hmm.
in a significant way. Um, we that's probably the biggest one is really going after that thing. I think that set us back some. Um, I think I think some of the cloud native stuff was we built a cloud native platform, our version of the product, which has been great. It's done well, but it was super hard to do,
I
super
see.
expensive. We started with the early days of Kubernetes. It was gross margin negative for quite a while. Like, to figure that out and to work with it was a bigger lift than we anticipated. So I think we were somewhat naive in embracing all of that stuff.
Hmm.
I think those are the two things that cost us time and money that I
Yeah.
would have loved to put my foot differently forward than we did at that point. But I think we're past all of that. And, I love what we've done with version 3. I think it's the right modern data architecture to build on these open table, open file format standards, all of these Apache projects. I think these are the right modern architectures. And so I'm happy where we're at. It was hard to get there, but I'm happy.
So I'm asking you all these piercing questions, but feel free to push back. When you made these mistakes, the VC, your investors must have been on your case. Like some, like, so where I'm going with this is, would it be easier for a company to go IPO and have public investors and have these VCs micromanaging and asking, why did you make this mistake and your gross margin negative? And so, what's your thought about the VC community and what's going on in Silicon Valley?
So I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. So in my experience, so I'm old as crap, but I've been doing this a long time, right? I started
Right.
my first company in '96. Over the course of my career, I've raised all too much venture capital
Hmm.
on different platforms and different capabilities and all that sort of stuff. And my general experience with the VC world is additive, not the trend. My general experience, particularly if you have, I have an excellent board of directors
Hmm.
now. There is, I have a way of operating with just try. I want them to know what I know almost at all times. I want them to know how I'm thinking. I also believe that they have pattern recognition that's really important for me to understand, that they
Hmm.
see lots of companies, particularly up and comers. And so, in general, I want them to be pressure testing my
Yeah.
thinking, and this is what I communicate to my team. And that pressure testing is valuable. My objective is to come out of every board meeting with two or three things that may have been background for me that are foreground as a result of those discussions. Now, I think I've been well served. I'm sure I've heard horror stories, but in general, I've been able to work with a quality group of people who are deeply experienced, which
I
is
see.
experience matters, and the company ends up better for it. So when we make mistakes, it's clear, like we all know, right? And the really good VCs, they're not hanging you for your mistakes. They're with you. They're partnered with you. That's my general feeling. It's been
I
like that.
see. Okay. Because I talk to startups and CEOs tell me, oh my God, I have to go to another board meeting. My VC doesn't really understand the reality, but they are like stuck on this pattern recognition they've established in their head. And it's like every board meeting is an exercise in futility from what I hear sometimes.
I think it's a matter of for the for two things. You can get VCs who are just, you can. It's not been generally my experience, been very rare. But I think as a CEO, there's a certain amount of like you want some accountability. You want somebody looking over your shoulder. You
Yeah.
want humility facing that sort of stuff. And what I find is and is preparing for the board meeting gets me very comfortable with my business. I go 4 layers deeper than I might in an operational
Hmm.
model. And I just sort of, because I'm presenting my business every
Yeah.
quarter. I'm
Yeah.
talking about it, capturing my thinking.
Yeah.
It can be a really great exercise. Yes, it's a lot of work.
This is great because we almost at the end. What advice would you give to the listeners, career advice or life advice that you think you've learned and yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know about life advice. There's so many things we could spend a whole,
Yeah.
but I can give advice from the CEO seat.
Hmm.
particularly on this last topic. We're in just an amazing time right now that you and I, and I've lived through everything from the first PCs showing up on employees' desks, including my own, to now this AI revolution. And so, you know, for CEOs, nothing is stable.
Yeah.
Nothing. Nothing is stable. And following your curiosity, I don't care where you're at in your career, consuming, learning is incredibly critical. On the issue of the CEO role and board activity, I think I said what I think
Yeah.
makes sense. The
That's
board's
right.
a productive partner. The board is not in opposition.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
board is, they have the same vested interest in you generally, which is
Yeah.
you want to make something that's valuable. And
Yeah.
so, you choose your investors wisely. It's actually
Right.
really important.
Right.
And do that. But you and I could do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah. So last question. What
Go ahead.
before we end, what are your hobbies? Like what are fun things that you do that yeah.
So I spent most of my 20s, I was a climber, so a fair amount in the
Hmm.
Himalayas in South
Oh
America,
really? Oh wow.
Yosemite, traveling around the world. So I didn't have a real job till I was in my late 20s. And so I do today that really manifests as hiking and trying to get up peaks. But I'm skiing a lot when I
Hmm.
can. Winter, I'm biking. I'm doing all this sort of stuff. I'm obviously a big reader, and I just sent my youngest off to college, and so now I
Hmm.
got to figure out what to do with
Amazing.
this extra time that
Yes,
I'm
we
about to
will
have.
see you more often now,
Very
you
well.
know.
We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see.
Thank you so much, Evan. It's been such a pleasure.
Sanjeev, always a pleasure, really.
The whole
And
time literally just flew.
congratulations on your success. You're doing an
Thank you
awesome
so much. It's been thanks, credit goes to people like you, so
job.
for helping me. So thank you. Amazing. Thanks everyone for staying till the very end. It's been a pleasure. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye bye.